New Year's Eve was supposed to mean fresh starts, loud celebrations, and hope for something better. For most people in the United States, it's a night filled with fireworks, countdowns, and crowded living rooms glowing with TV screens tuned to Times Square. For me, it became the night everything silently fell apart. It started like any other winter day. Cold air pressed against the windows, and the sky had that dull gray color that always shows up at the end of December. I woke up feeling slightly off, nothing dramatic at first. Just a heaviness in my chest, the kind you ignore because life doesn't pause for discomfort. I told myself it was stress, maybe exhaustion from work, maybe just anxiety. After all, the holidays had been tense in our house. By early afternoon, the pain sharpened. Breathing felt heavier, slower, like the air itself was resisting me. My head spun every time I stood up. I tried to sit it out, scrolling through my phone, watching everyone post about their New Year plans. Parties, dresses, smiles, countdown stickers. It all felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life. My stepsister knocked on my door around 4 p.m. "You don't look good," she said, her voice calm but alert. I tried to laugh it off. "I'll be fine. Just need rest." But she didn't buy it. Neither did my adopted brother when he came in a few minutes later. He stood there, arms crossed, studying me in that quiet way he always did. "You're going to the ER," he said. Not a question. A decision. Within an hour, I was in the back seat of a car, the heater blasting, streetlights blurring past the window as the pain in my chest came and went in waves. I remember thinking how strange it was that on a night people wait all year to celebrate, I was heading somewhere I never expected to be, an emergency room. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and recycled air. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as nurses moved quickly from one patient to the next. Monitors beeped in steady rhythms like mechanical heartbeats. I was wheeled into a curtained room, my jacket folded over a chair, wires attached to my chest. As the nurse asked routine questions, name, age, allergies, I kept glancing at the clock on the wall. 7:18 p.m. Still hours before midnight. My stepsister sat closest to me, scrolling on her phone, occasionally looking up to ask if I needed water. My adopted brother stood near the foot of the bed, talking quietly with a doctor. They looked like family. They sounded like family. And in that moment, I felt grateful. Vulnerable, but grateful. After a series of tests, the doctor returned with a serious but controlled expression. "We're going to keep you overnight for observation," he said. "It's the safest option. Overnight. New Year's Eve. In a hospital." I nodded, pretending it didn't bother me. Inside, disappointment mixed with relief. At least I was in the right place. My family left later that night. Hospital rules were strict, and visiting hours ended early because of the holiday. Before leaving, my stepsister squeezed my hand. "Don't worry," she said softly. "We'll come see you tomorrow. Just focus on getting better." My adopted brother gave a small nod. "Text if you need anything." And just like that, I was alone. The room was quiet except for the hum of machines and the occasional footsteps in the hallway. Outside my window, I could see faint reflections of city lights, blurred by the glass. Somewhere out there, people were preparing champagne bottles, dressing up, laughing. Somewhere out there, my family was heading back home. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how fragile everything suddenly felt. Your body, your plans, your assumptions. Around 10 p.m., nurses changed shifts. A new nurse came in, cheerful despite the long hours, wishing me a happy new year in advance. I smiled back, thanking her, feeling oddly disconnected from the words. I checked my phone. Notifications kept rolling in, group chats lighting up, friends posting countdown stories, strangers wishing the world a better year. I typed a few replies, keeping things light. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want questions. Midnight was getting closer. As the clock approached 11:45 p.m., I felt a strange loneliness settle in. Not the dramatic kind, just a quiet awareness that I was physically separated from the life I knew, from the people I trusted most. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but every channel was the same. Music, cheering crowds, flashing lights. Then, at 11:52 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message. From a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I ignored it. Spam was common. But something made me open it. No emojis. No greeting. Just a short line of text. My heart rate monitor reacted before I did. I stared at the screen, reading the message again and again, trying to understand what it was implying. It didn't explain everything. It didn't need to. The timing alone made my stomach drop. At exactly 11:59 p.m., fireworks exploded on the TV screen as the crowd began counting down. 10, 9, 8. I turned the phone face down on the bed, my hands shaking slightly. The room felt colder. The beeping of the monitor suddenly felt louder, more aggressive. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year, the TV shouted. But there was nothing happy about the silence that followed in my room. As the year changed, something else changed with it, my sense of security. The idea of family, that I had carried without question for years, suddenly felt unstable, like thin ice cracking beneath my feet. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling again, realizing that the night I entered the hospital for my body might also be the night something far deeper was injured. And whatever the truth was, I knew one thing for certain. The new year had started with a secret, and it was one I would never forget. Trust is a quiet thing. It doesn't announce itself or demand attention. It grows slowly, over shared meals, late-night conversations, and the belief that the people around you would never intentionally hurt you. For most of my life, I never questioned it, especially when it came to family. Growing up in an adopted family comes with its own emotional layers. You learn early that love isn't always about blood, but about choice. My parents chose me. And later, they chose my adopted brother too. My stepsister came into our lives after my father remarried. From the outside, we looked like a modern American family, blended, imperfect, but functional. Inside the house, routines mattered. Breakfast at the same table. Shared chores. Holidays that tried hard to feel normal, even when emotions were complicated. Over time, we stopped emphasizing labels like step or adopted. We were just family. Or at least, that's what I believed. My stepsister was the loudest presence in the house. She had a way of filling silence with stories, laughter, and opinions. People naturally gravitated toward her. She was expressive, confident, and emotionally intuitive, or so it seemed. When I was struggling, she noticed. When I was quiet, she asked questions. I mistook attentiveness for loyalty. My adopted brother was the opposite. Reserved. Observant. He spoke less but listened more. Growing up, I admired that about him. In a world that felt increasingly noisy, his calmness felt safe. We weren't best friends in the traditional sense, but there was an understanding between us, an unspoken agreement that we had each other's backs. That's how trust works. It builds in the spaces between words. In the months leading up to New Year's Eve, life had been tense but manageable. Work stress followed me home. Bills piled up. Family dinners sometimes felt forced. Still, I never suspected anything was wrong beneath the surface. If anything, I believed we were growing closer. My stepsister would often sit with me late at night, talking about life, goals, and frustrations. She spoke about feeling stuck, about wanting more from the future. I listened. I supported. I encouraged her. I thought that's what family did. My adopted brother spent more time at home too. He'd come back earlier from work, sometimes staying in the living room long after everyone else had gone to bed. I noticed it, but I didn't question it. Why would I? Trust makes you blind in subtle ways. Looking back, there were signs, small, almost invisible things. A conversation that stopped when I entered the room. A shared look that lasted half a second too long. Moments that didn't register at the time because my mind wasn't looking for danger. We don't question what feels normal. When I was admitted to the hospital, that trust went with me. Lying on that bed, wires attached to my chest, I never doubted that my family would be exactly who they had always claimed to be. I worried about my health. I worried about missing New Year's celebrations. I worried about work. But betrayal? That wasn't even on the list. After midnight, sleep didn't come easily. My body was exhausted, but my mind was restless. The anonymous message replayed itself in my thoughts, not as a clear accusation, but as a suggestion, a shadow of something I didn't want to name. I tried to rationalize it. People lie. People stir drama. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was someone trying to hurt me for no reason. Family doesn't do that. That's what I told myself. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the hospital window. Nurses came in and out, checking vitals, adjusting equipment, smiling politely. The world moved on, unaware that my internal balance was shifting. I checked my phone again. No messages from my stepsister. No check-in from my adopted brother. That felt strange, but I excused it. It was New Year's Day. People sleep in. People recover from celebrations. Still, something felt off. When my stepsister finally texted around noon, the message was short. "How are you feeling today?" No heart emoji. No warmth. Just a question. I replied politely, telling her the doctors were still running tests. I waited for reassurance, for comfort, for something that sounded like the person I trusted. It didn't come. My adopted brother didn't text at all. That silence spoke louder than words. As the day went on, memories began rearranging themselves in my mind. Conversations I had dismissed. Moments I had overlooked. My brain started doing what it does best when trust is broken. It searched for patterns. I remembered how my stepsister insisted on staying home that night instead of coming back to the hospital. I remembered how my adopted brother volunteered to drive her. I remembered how natural it all seemed at the time. Trust rewrites reality until it's challenged. By the time the doctor returned to tell me I could be discharged later that evening, I felt like I had aged years in a single day. Physically, I was improving. Emotionally, I was unraveling. Leaving the hospital should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like walking back into uncertainty. When I got home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Decorations from New Year's Eve were still there, half-empty bottles, discarded party hats, a banner crooked on the wall. Evidence of a celebration I hadn't been part of. My stepsister was in the kitchen when I walked in. She turned, smiled quickly, and asked if I needed anything. It was polite, distant. Not the warmth I expected after a night in the hospital. My adopted brother appeared a few minutes later. Same calm expression. Same controlled tone. "Glad you're okay," he said. I thanked him, listening carefully to the words he didn't say. We sat together in the living room, 3 people sharing the same space, but not the same reality. I watched them interact, how comfortable they seemed, how synchronized their movements were. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was my imagination. But once doubt enters your mind, it doesn't leave quietly. That night, alone in my room, I realized something painful. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes. Slowly. Thought by thought. Memory by memory. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed clarity. Emotional reactions wouldn't help me now. What hurt the most wasn't the possibility of betrayal. It was the realization that the people I had trusted without question were now strangers in my own home. Family is supposed to be the one place where you don't need armor. That night, I started building mine. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. New Year's Eve had always been my favorite holiday. The lights, the anticipation, the collective excitement of starting over. It made you believe that anything was possible. But this year, from my hospital bed to the quiet walls of my house, everything felt distorted, like I had stepped into a world where nothing was as it seemed. After being discharged, I thought the worst of my night was over. Physically, I was stable. The doctors were satisfied. Mentally, I felt on edge. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling. The more I replayed the previous night in my mind, the more the pieces didn't add up. Back home, the atmosphere was off. My stepsister and adopted brother acted as if nothing had happened. Their casual demeanor, the easy banter, even the laughter, it all felt rehearsed. Too smooth. Too perfect. I tried to push it away. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe I was just recovering from a scary night. But my instincts refused to comply. Something told me to pay attention, to observe, to notice every detail. The evening started like any other New Year's Eve in our home before the hospital incident. The living room was decorated with lights, a half-inflated banner reading, "Happy New Year 2026, stretched across the wall, and a faint scent of baked goods lingered in the air. My stepsister and adopted brother had prepared snacks and set the table with a casual precision that seemed deliberate. I watched them from the couch, pretending to scroll on my phone. My chest still ached slightly from the hospital tests, and the lingering fatigue made me less vigilant than I should have been. But my eyes didn't miss the subtle exchanges between them. A glance here, a smirk there, brief moments of laughter that stopped as soon as I looked up. I felt a knot form in my stomach. That subtle feeling you get when something is off. Not fear, exactly, but a quiet alarm bell that rings somewhere deep inside. As the night progressed, I tried to distract myself. I checked my phone repeatedly for messages from friends wishing me a happy new year. A few came through, full of excitement and emojis. I replied politely, but even the most enthusiastic messages couldn't fill the growing emptiness inside. By 11 p.m., the atmosphere in the house changed. The casual energy had shifted to an almost conspiratorial mood between my stepsister and adopted brother. They laughed quietly in the kitchen, their voices low, too low for me to understand. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me, something silly. I wanted to believe it. But then a moment happened that froze me. I saw them share a look across the kitchen counter, just for a second, but it was enough. In that second, I felt a cold, sinking realization. Whatever was happening behind my back, it was something I wasn't supposed to know. I pretended to stretch and grab a drink from the fridge, trying to act casual. My heart pounded. I wanted to confront them. I wanted answers. But without proof, confrontation would be foolish. Emotional reactions were dangerous. I needed to watch, to understand, to gather clarity. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, my mind wandered back to the anonymous message I had received in the hospital. The text had been cryptic, brief, and unnerving. I hadn't responded to it, afraid that it might provoke something I wasn't ready for. But now, seeing these small exchanges between my stepsister and adopted brother, I couldn't ignore it. The message wasn't a coincidence. The final countdown on TV started at 11:55 p.m. I placed myself on the edge of the couch, pretending to focus on the screen, but my eyes were trained on them. They were too calm, too synchronized, too normal. As the countdown progressed, I felt a mix of anxiety, betrayal, and helplessness. 10:98. The moment of realization hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, I understood the meaning of betrayal in plain sight. Everything they did, the casual touches, the quiet jokes, the shared glances, was a language I had ignored for too long. It was invisible to me because I wanted to trust them. For 3-2, the air felt heavier. Every sound in the house amplified. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustle of their movements. And then 1. "Happy New Year," came the TV voice, loud and celebratory. Outside, fireworks exploded in distant yards, lighting the night sky. Inside, the house remained quiet. My stepsister and adopted brother exchanged another subtle glance, this time longer. Something shifted in the room. I could feel it without understanding it fully. I didn't speak. I didn't move. My chest tightened. My mind raced. And yet, I couldn't tear my eyes away. After the initial cheers on TV, they returned to their activities. My stepsister offered me a plate of snacks, smiling, but her eyes were distant. My adopted brother's nod seemed forced, overly calm. The subtle energy between them, the way they moved in sync without me noticing, created a tension I couldn't ignore. I excused myself to my room. My legs felt heavy, my body drained not just from the hospital recovery, but from the emotional strain of watching them act like nothing had happened while I sat there, fully aware that something had. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I tried to process the night. Betrayal is a slow realization. It doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It comes like a shadow creeping over familiar ground, covering what you once knew with doubt. I thought about all the times I had confided in my stepsister, the late-night talks, the moments I trusted her implicitly. Every memory now felt tainted, as if a hidden lens had revealed a version of the past I had ignored. And my adopted brother. I had admired his calm, his steadiness. I had never imagined that someone I considered an ally in this house could be part of a secret that made me feel invisible in my own home. The night wore on. Fireworks faded. The streets outside quieted. And still, in my room, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining scenarios, analyzing moments I had previously dismissed. Every smile, every laugh, every glance became a puzzle piece of something I wasn't ready to fully see. The hardest part of trust broken quietly is that there is no immediate confrontation. You can't scream, you can't demand answers because the evidence is invisible, or worse, it's hidden in the behavior of those you believed in. I realized then that the new year hadn't just arrived. It had exposed a truth I hadn't wanted to see. A truth about trust, loyalty, and the people I considered family. Lying there, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. From this moment forward, I would need to guard my heart, observe with sharper eyes, and navigate the rest of this family dynamic with the awareness that appearances could no longer be trusted. By the time I finally drifted off to an uneasy sleep, the first rays of January 1st sunlight were peeking through the curtains. The house was quiet again, but my mind was not. It was alive with possibilities, suspicions, and questions I didn't yet have answers to. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that this New Year's Eve would be the moment my life subtly, irreversibly changed. The morning after New Year's Eve was heavy. The city outside my window was slowly waking up. Streetlights fading in the early sunlight, the distant hum of traffic creeping into the neighborhood. Birds chirped, oblivious to the chaos in my own mind. I sat on the edge of my bed, running through the events of the previous night again and again, trying to make sense of it all. Something had happened while I was hospitalized, something that left a knot in my chest tighter than any physical pain the doctors had treated. I needed clarity. I needed proof. I couldn't rely on instinct alone. Not anymore. My stepsister and adopted brother had acted so normal, so calm. It was almost unreal. But my instincts screamed that things weren't right. And trust, once broken, cannot be rebuilt on hope alone. I started with small observations. A half-empty bottle of soda on the kitchen counter. A chair slightly out of place. Footprints that seemed more deliberate than accidental. I moved through the house quietly, like someone trying not to disturb a fragile ecosystem. Each subtle clue added to the growing unease in my mind. Something had happened behind my back, something that I wasn't meant to see. I reached the living room, and that's when I noticed it. A small slip of paper, almost invisible, wedged between the sofa cushions. My heart skipped a beat. I picked it up carefully. It was a receipt from a local cafe, dated late last night, the very night I was admitted to the hospital. It listed 2 names, my stepsister and my adopted brother. They had gone out, in the middle of New Year's Eve, while I was in the hospital. Not together casually. Something about the timing, the secrecy, it felt deliberate. A wave of cold swept over me. I sat down on the couch, holding the paper like it was evidence of a crime I hadn't fully comprehended yet. Betrayal isn't always about what people do in front of you. It's about what they do when you're not there, when you trust them to be something they aren't. I remembered the subtle glances, the quiet laughter, the way they had interacted that night. It all made sense now, each small action forming a pattern I had ignored. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How could people I considered family act this way? How could they make me feel invisible in my own home? I needed to know more. I couldn't confront them without understanding the full scope of what had happened. My stepsister and adopted brother were smart, careful. If I accused them without proof, I would look paranoid, irrational. I needed to be methodical. I needed evidence. I decided to start with technology. Phones. Messages. Social media. In this day and age, people leave traces everywhere. I opened my laptop and began piecing together their digital footprints. Screenshots, timestamps, posts, tags. Everything that could corroborate what my instincts and observations were telling me. As I scrolled through the night's activity, my stomach churned. There it was, a series of messages exchanged between my stepsister and adopted brother during the hours I was hospitalized. Not harmful in a violent sense, but the intimacy, the secrecy, the way they planned to be together while pretending to care about me, it was undeniable. The truth hit me harder than I expected. Betrayal doesn't just hurt. It shatters the foundation you've built your life on. Every memory, every shared moment, suddenly felt tainted. I remembered sharing my worries with my stepsister, confiding personal fears and vulnerabilities, believing she cared. Now, each interaction was colored with deception, and the sense of security I had taken for granted was gone. I felt a strange mix of rage and numbness. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to demand explanations and hear apologies. Another part, deeper and quieter, urged patience. This wasn't just about emotions anymore. It was about understanding, documenting, and preparing for whatever came next. I decided to move carefully, like walking on ice. Every conversation, every interaction had to be noted, observed. I began tracking patterns, subtle behaviors, how they interacted when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I needed to understand their motives before taking any action. The day dragged on. Each hour felt heavier than the last. My stepsister and adopted brother moved around the house, pretending as if nothing had occurred. They laughed at jokes, moved with choreographed ease, and maintained appearances with chilling precision. The contrast between their outward normalcy and my inner turmoil was stark, almost surreal. At one point, I found myself standing by the window, looking out at the quiet streets. People were out, jogging, walking dogs, starting the year with routines and resolutions. I envied their simplicity, their ability to live without suspicion. For me, the new year had begun with a revelation, a piercing awareness of how fragile trust can be and how easily appearances can be manipulated. As evening approached, I felt a determination settling in. I couldn't let this pass unnoticed. I couldn't ignore the betrayal, but I also couldn't act rashly. I needed a plan. A A strategy. Something that would allow me to navigate the rest of this family dynamic without losing my sense of self or control. I returned to my laptop and began compiling everything I had. The receipt, the messages, timestamps, observations, everything that pointed to the truth. Seeing it all in one place, the pattern became undeniable. They had been deliberately secretive, acting as if my presence, my existence, or my trust didn't matter. And yet, even with proof, confronting them felt daunting. Betrayal cuts deep, not just because of what was done, but because of who did it. When someone you consider family betrays you, it challenges the very definitions you have about relationships, loyalty, and love. That night, I sat quietly in my room, reviewing every detail, feeling the weight of the new knowledge. I realized that the trust one had placed in my stepsister and adopted brother was broken. Not shattered in a moment, but eroded over time, until the truth finally revealed itself. For the first time, I understood the phrase, betrayal is the silent thief of trust. It steals quietly, leaving behind doubt, suspicion, and pain, often before the victim even notices. And now, as the night drew to a close, I felt both powerless and empowered. Powerless because the betrayal had occurred without my knowledge. Empowered because I now saw it clearly, with evidence, and could plan my next steps with intention. The truth I had never expected was finally visible. And while the realization hurt, it also offered clarity. For the first time, I could see the situation objectively, without the cloud of blind trust. And that clarity, though painful, was a tool. A weapon against further deception, a guide for the decisions I would need to make in the coming days. By the time I finally went to bed, exhausted both physically and emotionally, I understood one thing. The new year had brought me a harsh lesson in trust, vigilance, and the complexities of human relationships. And while the pain of the revelation lingered, I knew I was ready to face what came next. The morning after compiling all the evidence, I sat in my room staring at the documents spread across my desk. The receipt, the messages, timestamps, and notes, every piece pointed to the same undeniable truth. My stepsister and adopted brother had acted behind my back while I was hospitalized. It was a betrayal I had never imagined, and yet there it was, staring me in the face. I felt a storm of emotions. Anger, disappointment, disbelief, and something deeper, a hollow ache that came from realizing people you trust can intentionally hurt you without hesitation. But amidst the chaos, a sense of clarity emerged. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend it didn't happen. I had to confront them, but I had to do it on my own terms, carefully, methodically. I waited until late afternoon, the house quiet as they moved around in their routines. I rehearsed the conversation in my mind, choosing words that would express both the weight of the betrayal and my demand for honesty. My internal debate raged on. Should I confront them immediately, or should I gather more information to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting the signs? Logic won over impulsiveness. I would confront them now, but I would do so calmly, with evidence in hand, leaving no room for denials. I walked into the living room where they were sitting, pretending to watch TV. My stepsister glanced at me with her usual casual smile. My adopted brother looked up from his phone. They didn't sense the storm that had been brewing inside me. I took a deep breath. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. They both looked at me, curiosity mixed with a hint of unease. "About what?" my stepsister asked, feigning ignorance. I held up the receipt and my laptop, showing the compiled messages and timestamps. "About this," I said. "About what happened on New Year's Eve while I was in the hospital." For a moment, silence filled the room. It was heavy, almost tangible. The kind of silence that precedes an earthquake, where every second stretches unnaturally long. My stepsister's face went blank for the first time in my memory. My adopted brother's calm demeanor faltered slightly, his eyes flicking toward hers. It was subtle, but it was enough. I don't know what you mean," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual, lacking its usual confidence. I placed the laptop on the table between us, opening a message thread that clearly showed their communication during the hours I was hospitalized. "Don't play games," I said, my tone unwavering. "These messages, the receipt, everything, it shows exactly what you two were doing. I trusted you. Both of you. And this is how you repay that trust." My adopted brother looked away, his hands fidgeting slightly. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to form words that could justify the situation. The room remained tense. Silence stretched on, but it was different now. This was not peaceful. It was heavy with accusation, confrontation, and the unspoken realization that the bonds I had relied on were fragile, perhaps even broken. "I thought family meant something," I said, my voice breaking slightly despite my effort to stay composed. "I thought trust meant something. How long were you planning to keep this from me? How long were you planning to pretend everything was normal?" Neither of them spoke. The weight of the evidence, the clarity of the situation, had rendered words almost unnecessary. My stepsister looked down at her hands, twisting a sleeve nervously. My adopted brother avoided my gaze entirely. Their silence was telling. The more they remained silent, the more the truth solidified in my mind. Actions speak louder than words, and their lack of explanation spoke volumes. I realized painfully that some relationships cannot be salvaged simply with conversation. Some betrayals leave marks that cannot be erased. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I don't know if I can trust either of you again," I said. "And I need time to process this. I need time to figure out what this means for us, for this family." Finally, my stepsister spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't mean to." I held up a hand, stopping her. "Save it. I don't need excuses. I need honesty. And right now, I have everything I need to know." My adopted brother's expression softened, a mixture of guilt and resignation crossing his face. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The betrayal had gone too deep. I left the room quietly, retreating to the sanctuary of my own space. The silence that followed their failed responses was deafening. I realized that confrontation doesn't always bring closure. Sometimes it only brings awareness, clarity about the people around you, about what you can expect from them, and about how you will navigate the path ahead. Sitting alone in my room, I reflected on the morning, the evidence, and the confrontation. I realized that anger and hurt were valid, but so was control. I could choose how I reacted, how I let this affect me. The betrayal had been done, but my response was still mine. As the day turned into night, the house remained quiet, each of us living with the weight of the confrontation in different ways. For me, the silence was both painful and liberating. Painful because the bonds I had relied on were fractured, perhaps beyond repair. Liberating because the truth, however painful, freed me from illusions. I could no longer be blindsided. I could no longer ignore subtle signs. That night, I lay in bed, replaying the events over and over. Confrontation is not about victory, it's about recognition. And in recognizing the betrayal, I had taken the first step toward reclaiming control over my own life. I realized something crucial. Betrayal leaves a mark, but it also teaches lessons. It teaches vigilance. It teaches clarity. And it teaches the painful but necessary truth that not everyone you trust has your best intentions at heart. By the time sleep finally came, I knew that the next steps I took would be decisive. I couldn't unsee what I had discovered. I couldn't undo what had happened. But I could control what came next, how I moved forward, how I protected myself, and how I redefined the meaning of trust within this family. The silence after confrontation is heavy, but it is also powerful. It gives space to think, to plan, to rebuild. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I understood that this was only the beginning of a journey that would force me to face my emotions, confront reality, and make decisions that would shape my life long after this New Year's Eve. The days following the confrontation felt surreal. The house, once a place of comfort, now seemed foreign. Every corner held memories of trust and laughter that had been irreversibly altered. The betrayal of my stepsister and adopted brother lingered in the air, palpable and heavy, as if the walls themselves were aware of the fracture that had occurred. I spent hours reflecting on what had happened, walking through every moment from the night I was hospitalized to the confrontation. I realized that the pain wasn't just about the acts themselves. It was about what those acts represented. It was the violation of trust, the disregard for my presence, the realization that the people I considered family could prioritize themselves over me without hesitation. I knew that anger alone wasn't enough. Rage is fleeting, clarity is permanent. I needed to decide how I would move forward, not as someone betrayed, but as someone empowered. And that meant making choices that prioritized my own well-being, my self-respect, and my peace of mind. The first step was physical space. I started spending more time outside the house, walking through nearby parks, revisiting familiar streets, and absorbing the world beyond the walls that now felt suffocating. The cold winter air was sharp, almost cleansing, reminding me that the world was larger than the deception I had uncovered. The city bustled around me, unaware of my internal turmoil, but there was a strange comfort in that anonymity. I also began reconnecting with friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Casual conversations over coffee, laughter that didn't feel forced, and the genuine warmth of people who had no hidden agendas reminded me that trust could exist, even if it had been broken within my family. These interactions were small, but they mattered. They helped me rebuild a foundation of connection, independent of betrayal. At home, I maintained distance without unnecessary conflict. I no longer sought validation or warmth from my stepsister or adopted brother. Their presence was neutral now, neither comforting nor destructive. I realized that self-respect isn't about revenge, it's about boundaries. It's about refusing to allow others' choices to dictate your self-worth. I spent time journaling, documenting my thoughts, feelings, and observations. Writing became a way to process the complexity of emotions, anger, sadness, disappointment, and ultimately empowerment. I could pour everything onto the pages without judgment, without fear of interruption, and without needing approval. Each sentence was a step toward reclaiming control over my narrative. Slowly, I noticed a shift within myself. The knot of betrayal in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a quiet strength. I could think clearly again, make decisions confidently, and envision a life that didn't revolve around the people who had hurt me. The realization was liberating. I didn't need to fix them. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need validation. I needed myself. One evening, as the sun set, casting golden light across the living room, I reflected on how far I had come in a matter of days. The confrontation had been painful, but it was necessary. The silence that followed was heavy, but it taught me patience and resilience. The betrayal was permanent, but my response could be deliberate, thoughtful, and dignified. I decided to have one final conversation with my stepsister and adopted brother. Not to demand apologies, not to relive the betrayal, but to establish boundaries clearly. I spoke calmly, firmly, and without emotion that could be used against me. I explained that trust had been broken, and that moving forward, I would prioritize my own well-being. I would engage with them only on neutral terms, without expecting intimacy or loyalty. Their reactions were varied. My stepsister looked apologetic but distant, her attempts at justification falling flat. My adopted brother was quiet, perhaps recognizing the consequences of his actions. It didn't matter. What mattered was my clarity. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had reclaimed my self-respect. Over the next few weeks, I continued to focus on myself. I pursued hobbies I had neglected, dedicated time to personal growth, and built routines that reinforced stability and independence. I surrounded myself with people who uplifted me, who valued honesty and respect, and who reminded me that life is too short to be controlled by betrayal. I also learned the subtle art of observation. I could now see patterns, recognize signs of deception, and assess relationships with discernment. The experience had taught me that trust is not blind. It is earned and maintained. And that realization became a shield, protecting me from future harm while empowering me to make informed choices. By the time February arrived, the house felt less oppressive. I moved through each day with renewed confidence, carrying the lessons of the previous months without allowing them to dictate my happiness. I realized that walking away with self-respect isn't about cutting people out entirely. It's about disengaging emotionally, prioritizing one's own peace, and refusing to let betrayal define your identity. One evening, I stood by the window, watching the city lights twinkle. The streets were busy, life continuing without pause. And I understood something profound. Life moves forward, regardless of betrayal, deception, or hurt. What matters is how we choose to move with it. I had chosen clarity over confusion, self-respect over resentment, and empowerment over dependence. The betrayal of my stepsister and adopted brother had been painful, but it had also been transformative. It had forced me to see clearly, to act decisively, and to redefine my sense of family, trust, and personal boundaries. And as I watched the night settle over the city, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The past could not be changed, but the future was mine to shape. I was no longer a victim of circumstances or deception. I was a witness to my own resilience, a curator of my own life, and the author of my own story. Walking away with self-respect doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing wrongdoing. It means recognizing the value of your own dignity, choosing where to invest your emotional energy, and refusing to be diminished by others' choices. That night, I closed my journal, turned off the lights, and lay down with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Betrayal had tried to break me, but in its place, I had built strength. Pain had given way to clarity. Silence had become empowerment. And for the first time since that New Year's Eve, I felt free. I knew the journey ahead wouldn't always be easy. Trust is fragile, and relationships are complex. But I also knew that I had learned the most important lesson. Self-respect is not given. It is claimed, nurtured, and defended. And with that knowledge, I was ready to face whatever the future held, grounded in the unshakable truth of my own worth. The story that began with betrayal, fear, and doubt had ended, not with revenge, but with dignity, resilience, and empowerment. And as I looked forward, I realized that this was only the beginning of a life lived on my terms, a life where trust is measured, boundaries are respected, and self-respect is never compromised.